Hello and welcome to Tomi Talks TV. I have one singular goal with this show, and that is to help you make smarter decisions so that you can have better relationships. I'd like to say a massive, massive thank you to all of you for your likes and your shares and your comments on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. I really, really appreciate you because what you're doing is that you're helping us spread the message further faster. So thank you very much indeed. And a special shout out to those of you that follow me on YouTube. I really appreciate you. YouTube is one of the best places for you to always make sure that you get my videos. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please go to YouTube and find my channel, Tomi Toluhi. Subscribe and press the notifications button so that you don't ever have to miss another video that I share. Now, what I wanted to do this week and next week is to share with you on what I have titled The 7 Myths of Marriage. The 7 myths of marriage. Now, why have I decided to do this? Is because, in the course of my, counseling with various people and talking to them about their marriages and trying to help them find a way forward, I tend to find that these 7 myths come up again and again in our conversation. So I thought, well, it's well worth coming to share with you about these 7 myths. Essentially, what a myth is essentially just a false belief or idea that lots of people hold. And the challenge with a myth in marriage is that it prevents us from engaging in marriage in the most meaningful way that we can. It prevents us from getting the best out of our marriages. So I really want to share with you on this so that we can debunk any myths, false ideas and thoughts that we had about marriage that are preventing us from experiencing the fullest of what marriage is meant to be for us or what God desires for marriage to be for us. So I'll share with you this week on 4 of them, and next week I will share with you on 3 of them. Now, the first of the myths is this: the I am good enough as I am myth. I'm sure that probably sounds familiar. So this myth essentially is the one that says, well, no matter how I behave, my spouse should be happy with me simply because they are my spouse. Now think about that for a minute. Most of the time when people talk like this, oh, I'm good enough as I am, essentially what it means is that, it's an excuse not to change. Now, without a doubt, you need to value yourself and accept yourself, and God values us and accepts us. But that does not mean that there is no room for improvement or change. So you see, the fact that your spouse is committed to you in marriage does not necessarily mean that they will be automatically happy being married to you, because you owe it to yourself to always bring your best version, the best version of yourself into your marriage. Because the thing is that marriage does not naturally fall into place as a happy marriage. There's investment that needs to be made in a marriage for it to be a happy marriage. I mean, I've talked to lots of people who have lived through many years of marriage. They've experienced many years of happy marriage, and not one of them would ever say, oh, I don't know how this happened. It was just accidental. We didn't make any investment in our marriage at all. But hey, it's just working. Marriage takes investment. And I suppose my question to you would be this: what do you have to lose by bringing your best self to your marriage? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So if you invest in being your best for your spouse, then, and if you're persistent in doing that, so what that means is that you will reap the rewards of marriage. So don't assume that because you are good enough for your spouse to marry you, then that means, you need to stay in that rut and not improve yourself or develop yourself or learn more about, what it takes to make marriage work. And, I'm always baffled when I see people who are obviously struggling in marriage. They're not experiencing the kind of marriage that God has intended for them to have, but they don't want to attend counseling, they don't want to read books on marriage, they don't want to watch videos on marriage or listen to people teach on marriage, they don't want to talk to couples who maybe are ahead of them in the marriage game. And I ask myself, what do you stand to gain by not bringing your best self to your marriage? The thing is this: for every other thing in life that we value, we take time to invest in ourselves, to develop. If you want to grow in your career, you take time to invest in yourself, to develop. You read, you study, you do everything that it takes to keep developing, because you know that if you don't keep developing, then the world will pass you by. So it should be the same in our marriages as well. You're great as a person, yes, but it doesn't mean that this is all that there is. So there is so much more that you can develop in yourself, so that you can bring your best self into your marriage. So I really want to encourage you that, don't buy into this myth of, oh, I'm good enough, I'm not talking to anyone, or I'm not going for counseling, or I'm not reading books and all that, it is what it is. You owe it to yourself to have the best in marriage, and to have the best in marriage, you've got to bring your best self into your marriage. So that's the first myth I wanted to talk about. The second myth I wanted to talk about is this. There is this myth that criticism brings change. This one is really an issue. People feel that, the way to get change in my spouse is to constantly criticize them, criticize their actions, criticize the way they behave in the marriage and all the rest of that. But what, I've come to discover is that criticism does not bring change. It simply breeds resistance. And this is especially true for men, because a man's greatest fear is being controlled by a woman. So if you're constantly as a wife criticizing your husband, he can't seem to do anything right, everything he does, you complain about this and complain about that and complain about the other, at some point the likelihood is that he would dig in his heels and just feel, look, there's no point, I can't win, in loving my wife, so I just won't bother, I won't even try. None of us likes to be reminded constantly about our inadequacies. And the thing about life is that we tend to be drawn to or attracted to people who celebrate the good in us. So and this is a need for both of us, to be honest, both husbands and wives. It's not exclusive to husbands alone, it's both husbands and wives. But I think it's particularly important to say that for wives, we need to be especially conscious of this, because as women, we always want to get the best out of our marriages, and the tendency is for us to constantly be looking for things that a husband needs to improve here, and all that. But what about the times when your spouse, your husband or your wife does things that are great in the marriage? Do you actually take the time to acknowledge the things that they've done? Do you take the time to appreciate the little things that they do? None of us likes to be constantly, blamed and confronted. We will always gravitate towards where we're complimented, or where we're encouraged, or where people see the good in us. Am I saying that, if your spouse has, certain issues in marriage that need to be addressed, then, you shouldn't mention them at all? You should always turn a blind eye? That's not what I'm saying. Am I saying that you should not express your feelings or your needs or your desires in marriage? That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this: constantly criticizing your spouse is not a strategy for joy in marriage. So there are a few things that you could do. First of all, reinforce any positive behavior that you see in your spouse, because that is far more effective than criticizing. So even if they haven't done certain things that you really want them to do, if they do certain things, praise them, encourage them, appreciate the little things that they do. That's the first thing. The second thing is this: when you have a need and if you feel like your spouse is not quite meeting it, express your need, but express it positively, without placing blame on your spouse. Because when you express your need positively, like, this is something that you desire, rather than blaming them for not doing it, then they have an opportunity to respond graciously to your request. That's the other thing. And then also, we need to moderate our expectations and focus on our most important needs, rather than criticizing every single thing that our spouse does. Because sometimes, we pick arguments about things that are not even important. If you keep bombarding your spouse with, every little thing that you feel they've not done, that, you feel is not up to scratch, then it sucks the joy out of marriage. But rather, if we look for things to praise in our spouse, we look for things to encourage in our spouse, we look for things to appreciate in our spouse, and then when we need to share our needs, we share them, positively, but sparingly, and then we go to God and we pray about it and trust God that God will help them, to rise to the challenge to meet our needs. Then we'll experience more joy in our homes and in our marriages. So criticism does not bring change. All it does is that, it just breeds resistance. I always say about nagging that nagging is just telling your spouse the truth about their faults all over and over and over and over again. It doesn't bring change. Nobody ever thinks to themselves, oh wow, my spouse has criticized me so much that I just have to change. But if you have someone that truly believes in you, there's that desire and that willingness to actually reach beyond yourself and do even much more than you ever thought that you could. So you can inspire a change in your spouse by valuing them and encouraging them in the things that they do in the marriage. So that's the second thing. The third myth that I wanted to talk about today is what I've called the mind reading myth. And this is a very funny one. Essentially, this is a myth that says, well, if my spouse loves me, then they should automatically know what it is that I need. Your spouse is not a mind reader. They're not a mind reader. So don't fall into this myth. It's an absolute fallacy. Sometimes people use this as an excuse to think, well, if my spouse is not meeting my needs, then I just withdraw, and then they don't say a word, and then the spouse is wondering what's going on here, what have I done? Because in your head you've thought to yourself, well, if I do this, my spouse should do that, or if I say this, my spouse should say that, or if I turn up like this, my spouse should be wow, and all that. And then because they don't, they miss the moment, then you kind of withdraw. And the funny thing is, maybe you have your spouse saying to you, well, what's going on? You're like, no, there's nothing. Is there something you want to talk about? No, I'm fine. That doesn't help. Your spouse is not a mind reader. We have to communicate clearly what we need in our marriages. And, sometimes you might have to mention it again. I'm not saying, harp on it over and over again, but be clear about what it is that you desire in your marriage. Don't expect your spouse to automatically know what you need. They're not God. It's only God that can read your mind and knows exactly what it is that you need before you actually even say it. So don't expect your spouse to read your mind, but instead be prepared to share your needs in a loving and honest manner, but in a non-judgmental way, rather than leaving your spouse guessing and wondering what it is that you want out of your marriage. So that's the third thing. And then the last one I want to share with you today is what I call the say it as it is myth. So that's the one that simply says, well, my spouse is my soulmate. That means I can say anything that I feel at any point in time in the marriage, and they should be absolutely fine with it. No. You see, research has shown that for every destructive word that we speak to someone, we will need to counter that destructive word with 5 positive things to be able to balance, that marriage out. So we need to be very careful about how we express ourselves in our homes and in our marriages. The fact that you're feeling something in the heat of the moment doesn't necessarily mean that you should say it. The Bible says in the book of Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15, it says, speaking the truth in love. So it's not enough for you to speak the truth. The truth must be spoken in love. You need to take responsibility for how you express yourself, even when you are hurt. There's a tendency for us when we feel hurt, to just want to say things, as they are, and just pour it all out there, say everything that comes to our minds, and then we expect our spouses to automatically forget those things after that argument. But you see, words are like eggs. Once you break them, you can't gather the contents back together again and put them back in the shell. No, the genie is already out of the bottle. So what I'm saying is this: you've got to mind your mouth, because where your mouth goes, your marriage goes. I want you to pause and think about that. Where your mouth goes, your marriage goes. So if you say it just the way that you feel it, you might make the best speech that you will live to regret. So you've really got to choose your words carefully. We need to be careful about how we choose our words. Let's speak life with our words into our marriages. The Bible says that life and death is in the power of the tongue, and those that love it will eat the fruit thereof. So let's always constantly speak life into our marriages and be careful about the words that we use even when we are upset. Take responsibility for your feelings and express yourself in a positive manner so that it doesn't become difficult for you to recover from whatever disagreement it is because of all the words that you have said to your spouse. Well, I hope this has helped you. This has helped you, then please leave me a message or like or share a comment on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, and next week I'll be sharing with you the second part of this message. God bless you and take care. Bye for now.